The deafening mechanical roar of a massive industrial diesel engine echoed violently across the quiet, pristine waters of Blackwood Lake. I didn't need a high-tech security system or a GPS notification to tell me my life was being destroyed. I could physically feel the heavy, rhythmic vibrations in the dirt beneath my boots the second I stepped out of my truck. It was 10 a.m. on a Tuesday. I am a senior environmental consultant and wetland biologist. 3 years ago, I used every single cent of my savings to purchase a beautiful, custom-built, $500,000 A-frame cedar house sitting on 3 acres of deep, heavily wooded lakefront property. It wasn't just a home, it was a carefully preserved eco-sanctuary. As I sprinted down the long gravel driveway, the thick canopy of pine trees broke, and I completely froze. The breath was violently knocked out of my lungs. The 30-ton yellow Caterpillar excavator was parked directly in the center of my living room. The heavy steel treads had completely crushed my front porch. As I watched in absolute paralyzed horror, the massive steel bucket swung backward and slammed aggressively into the vaulted cedar roof of my home. The sickening, explosive crunch of splintering timber and shattering glass echoed across the water. My $500,000 sanctuary collapsed inward, or reduced to a massive pile of jagged rubble and toxic drywall dust in less than 30 seconds. My knees physically buckled under the shock. I dropped heavily onto the damp dirt, my hands covering my mouth as hot tears of pure, unfiltered devastation streamed down my face. Every dollar I had saved, every piece of custom furniture ground into the mud. But the deafening sound of the bulldozer wasn't the only noise on my property. Make sure you zoom in on her face. Oh my God, she's actually crying. I slowly turned my head. Standing less than 50 feet away, safely positioned away from the dust, were my mother, Margaret, and my father, Arthur. Standing right next to them was my 28-year-old chronically unemployed golden child brother, Derek, wearing a pastel polo shirt and designer sunglasses. Margaret was holding her gold-plated smartphone completely steady, actively recording my devastated reaction with a wide, sociopathic smile plastered across her face. I stumbled back to my feet, wiping the wet dirt and tears from my cheeks. The sheer cruelty of my own family mocking my grief acted like an injection of ice water into my veins. I walked aggressively toward them. "What are you doing?" I screamed over the roar of the diesel engine, my voice raw in agony. "That is my house. You are destroying my house." Margaret lowered the phone just enough to look me in the eye, her voice dripping with venomous, unbothered arrogance. "It's your brother's land now, loser. Go rent a room." Margaret smirked loudly, projecting her voice so the private demolition crew operating the excavator could hear her. Derek took a casual sip from a Yeti thermos, gesturing vaguely toward the massive pile of splintered cedar that used to be my kitchen. "The A-frame was incredibly outdated, Harper," Derek scoffed, completely devoid of any guilt. "I'm having the crew clear the entire lot today. I'm bringing in an architect next week to build a massive, modern concrete lake mansion. It's going to have a sick infinity pool and a private dock for my boat. You weren't even using the land right. You just let weeds grow everywhere." "You don't own this land," I yelled, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. "I hold the deed. You can't just hire a demolition crew to destroy a $500,000 property." "Oh, please stop being so dramatic and selfish," Margaret sighed, rolling her eyes in exaggerated suburban exhaustion, directly deploying the ultimate toxic enabler excuse, while her phone recorded every word. "The family shares its wealth, Harper. You travel for your environmental conferences all the time. You don't need a massive lakefront lot just to look at birds. Derek wants to settle down and host his friends. He deserves a premium property to project success. The family needs to provide for him." I stared at the woman who birthed me. My panic was completely eclipsed by an absolute freezing rage. "If the family is supposed to provide a premium property for Derek," I asked, my voice dropping into a dangerous, trembling whisper, instantly setting the hypocritical trap. Then why didn't you and Dad simply give him 2 acres of your massive 10-acre luxury estate in the gated community? Why didn't he build his mansion in your backyard? Margaret visibly recoiled, her face twisting in sheer, aristocratic disgust. I absolutely not, Margaret snapped, immediately exposing her massive, shallow hypocrisy for her own video recording. Our estate is perfectly landscaped. I am not having a loud, filthy construction zone ruining my view of the golf course for the next 2 years. Besides, Derek wants to throw loud boat parties. Your lot is out in the woods. It's perfect for him to make noise without bothering our country club neighbors. They hadn't just stolen my property. When they had specifically targeted my home so they wouldn't have to inconvenience their own luxurious lifestyle to fund their golden child's vanity project. The demolition company wouldn't touch this lot without a municipal permit and a signed quitclaim deed, I stated, the cold mechanical logic of my profession completely overriding my panic. I glared directly at my father. How did you get heavy machinery onto my private property, Arthur? My father chuckled arrogantly, unadjusting his pristine golf polo, completely unaware that he was actively confessing to multiple severe state felonies on the very smartphone his wife was currently using. I know the zoning commissioner down at the county office, Arthur bragged proudly, crossing his arms. I just told him we were doing a family property transfer. I signed your name on the demolition permit and the land transfer documents. As your father, I obviously have proxy over your assets. The county clerk rubber-stamped it yesterday. It's perfectly legal, Harper. So pack up whatever is left in your truck and get off Derek's construction site. If you dare try to sue us or call the local police over a family real estate transfer, you are completely dead to us, Harper, Margaret shrieked, instantly sensing the shift in my demeanor and launching her ultimate enabler threat. We will cut you off. You will have no family left. Is that a promise? I asked quietly. Margaret blinked, on her arrogant smirk faltering slightly at the sheer, chilling lack of emotion in my response. I didn't drop back to my knees. I didn't scream at her. I didn't beg for my house back. I slowly turned my head away from the crushed ruins of my home and looked directly at the massive yellow bulldozer. The operator had finished crushing the living room and was now aggressively driving the massive steel treads forward, violently churning up 50 yards of the natural, the reed-covered shoreline and pushing toxic drywall debris directly into the water to expand the beach for Derek's imaginary infinity pool. They thought they had outsmarted me with a forged piece of county paper. They assumed that because I was their daughter, they could commit felony fraud, destroy a $500,000 asset, and force me to absorb the loss to keep the family peace. They completely forgot what I do for a living, and they completely failed to read the highly restrictive zoning covenants attached to my property deed. You didn't just forge a municipal permit, Arthur, I said, a cold, ruthless smile slowly creeping across my face. You just ordered a 30-ton excavator to violently dredge and destroy 50 yards of a designated Class 1 protected wetland. Arthur's smug smile vanished. What are you talking about? This property sits directly on the protected nesting habitat of an endangered species of migratory heron, I explained smoothly, pulling my cell phone from my olive green jacket. When I bought this land, I legally placed the entire shoreline under a strict, irrevocable federal conservation easement with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Margaret slowly lowered her phone, the color violently draining from her face as she looked at the massive steel bucket ripping huge chunks of mud and protected reeds out of the water. You can forge my signature at a lazy county office, Arthur, I concluded, bypassing the local 911 dispatch entirely and dialing a highly specific, direct federal hotline. But you cannot forge a federal environmental impact waiver. You didn't just commit a civil property dispute. You just committed a massive federal environmental crime. I pressed the phone to my ear. EPA Criminal Investigation Division, a stern voice answered. My name is Harper Vance, I stated clearly, maintaining dead-eyed contact with my suddenly terrified parents. I am reporting the active, catastrophic destruction of a federally protected wetland and conservation easement by an unauthorized commercial demolition crew. I need heavily armed federal agents on site immediately. Hold the line, miss. To Vance? The federal dispatcher instructed, her voice completely stripped of the casual tone you'd hear from a local 911 operator. The rapid, heavy clacking of a mechanical keyboard echoed through the receiver. I am verifying the property coordinates against the National Conservation Easement database now. There was exactly a 4-second pause. Coordinates confirmed, the dispatcher stated, her voice dropping into a sharp priority response register. Property. ID 409-B is a federally designated Class 1 protected wetland and a registered migratory nesting habitat under the Clean Water Act. Any unauthorized mechanical dredging or destruction is an immediate federal felony. We are dispatching a heavily armed rapid response unit from the EPA Criminal Investigation Division and local U.S. Marshals. Do not approach the heavy machinery. Understood, I replied calmly, lowering my phone. The massive yellow Caterpillar excavator was still roaring, on its heavy steel treads grinding my shattered cedar porch into toxic dust. But the private operator sitting inside the glass cab wasn't deaf. He had his side window slid open to combat the morning heat, and he had clearly heard the words EPA Criminal Investigation Division and Federal Felony broadcasted loudly from my phone speaker. The operator's eyes widened in sheer, unfiltered panic. He didn't gently lower the bucket. He slammed his hand violently against the heavy red emergency kill switch on his console. The deafening roar of the 30-ton diesel engine died instantly, violently sputtering out into a shocking, heavy silence. The massive steel bucket dropped heavily into the mud with a sickening thud, resting just inches away from the protected water line. "Hey, what are you doing?" Arthur, my father, barked angrily, waving his arms at the cab. He completely ignored me, stepping aggressively toward the machine in his pristine golf polo. "I am paying your company by the hour. Turn that machine back on and finish clearing the shoreline. Derek needs the foundation leveled by Thursday." The operator aggressively kicked the heavy cab door open and practically fell out of the machine, his face completely pale under his hard hat. "Are you insane, man?" the operator screamed, pointing a trembling, grease-stained finger directly at Arthur. "Not you told my boss this was a standard residential teardown. You gave us a signed municipal permit. If I drag a 30-ton bucket through a Class 1 federal wetland, the EPA will permanently revoke my commercial license, confiscate a $500,000 machine, and throw me in federal prison. I'm not touching another inch of this dirt." The operator didn't wait for an argument. He grabbed his lunch cooler, sprinted up my ruined driveway, and abandoned the massive yellow machine entirely. Derek scoffed loudly, taking another arrogant sip from his expensive Yeti thermos. He adjusted his designer sunglasses, completely unfazed by the operator's terror. "Wow, what a drama queen," Derek muttered, shaking his head. He looked at my father. "Dad, just call your buddy at the zoning office and get another crew out here tomorrow. This guy is useless." Margaret, my mother, finally lowered her gold-plated smartphone. The smug and sociopathic smile she had worn while recording my tears had faltered slightly, but her thick armor of suburban entitlement remained entirely intact. She genuinely believed that her family's wealth and status made them completely immune to the consequences of the law. "Harper, stop throwing a childish tantrum." Margaret sighed heavily, smoothing out her expensive designer coat as she stepped over a shattered piece of my roof. "You are just trying to scare us. The federal government doesn't care about a stupid patch of weeds and a few birds. Arthur will call the mayor this afternoon. We will gladly write a check to the city for a little landscaping fine. The family has plenty of money. Derek is building his infinity pool here, and that is final." "You can't write a check to the city, Margaret," I noted quietly, crossing my arms over my olive green canvas jacket. I was completely numb to the destruction of my home, running purely on the cold, a calculating adrenaline of a professional biologist watching a poacher step into a steel trap. Because the city doesn't own the water rights. The United States government does. "Oh, please, who do you think you're talking to?" Arthur shouted, his face flushing bright red with patriarchal rage. "I am a senior partner at my firm. I am friends with the county judge. I don't care what fake environmental nonsense you filed, Harper. I forged your signature because you were being selfish with family assets. It's our land now." He had just loudly, proudly confessed to felony forgery and fraud on a property deed, standing directly in front of the active camera his wife was still holding. "I'll remember you said that," I replied evenly. The heavy, rhythmic crunch of tires on gravel interrupted Arthur's next threat. It wasn't a local, friendly county sheriff pulling into my driveway. It was 3 massive, completely blacked out, unmarked Chevy Tahoe Interceptors. They didn't park politely. They swerved aggressively onto the ruined, muddy grass, effectively boxing in the abandoned bulldozer and completely blocking the only exit to the property. The heavy steel doors flew open in unison. 6 heavily built federal agents stepped out into the mud. They weren't carrying ticket books or clipboards. They were wearing dark tactical Kevlar vests with EPA-CID Federal Agent emblazoned across their chests in bold, high visibility yellow lettering. Several of them had their hands resting firmly on the heavy black tactical rifles slung across their chests. This wasn't a local noise complaint. This was a high-risk federal environmental raid. Arthur's arrogant, booming, patriarchal persona vaporized in a microsecond. The color violently drained from his face as he stared at the tactical rifles. Margaret let out a short, terrified gasp, instinctively taking a step backward and hiding behind my father, Derek. Now, completely blinded by his status as the golden child, actually stepped forward, holding his Yeti thermos like a shield of absolute privilege. "Whoa, guys, take it easy," Derek called out, flashing a wide, arrogant frat boy smile at the federal agents. "You're on private property. We're just doing some construction for my new lake house. My dad is friends with the zoning commissioner, so if there's a permit issue, we can just clear it up with a phone call." The lead agent, a massive, our veteran federal investigator with sharp, uncompromising eyes, didn't smile back. He didn't care about Derek's polo shirt, his Yeti cup, or his father's country club connections. He looked past Derek, his eyes locking directly onto the massive pile of toxic drywall dust and the deep, jagged mechanical trenches the bulldozer had just ripped through the protected shoreline reeds. "Private property," the lead agent scoffed, his deep voice carrying a terrifying, absolute authority that completely silenced the lakefront. He stepped aggressively toward Derek. "Son, you are standing on a federally registered biological sanctuary. You just authorized the mechanical dredging of a protected migratory habitat." "It's just a few weeds," Margaret shrieked from behind my father, her suburban entitlement desperately trying to fight off her rising panic. "We are going to pay the city a fine. The family shares its wealth. Well, we just wanted to build a pool." The lead agent stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my father. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. The sheer weight of the federal penal code did the talking for him. "Ma'am, the fine for the unauthorized destruction of a Class 1 wetland under the Federal Clean Water Act isn't paid to the city," the lead agent stated smoothly. "The statutory penalty is exactly $50,000 per day per violation." Arthur's knees visibly buckled. "What, 50,000? And considering you destroyed a $500,000 structure to illegally access the water line," the agent continued, his eyes hardening into pure ice, You aren't just looking at bankruptcy. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in a federal penitentiary for environmental terrorism and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. The sheer suffocating weight of the phrase 10 years in a federal penitentiary hung heavily in the freezing morning air, instantly silencing the morning breeze coming off Blackwood Lake. Arthur's deep, booming patriarch voice vanished completely. He stood frozen in his pristine golf polo, staring in unfiltered terror at the massive, heavily armed EPACID agent standing exactly 2 feet in front of him. The terrifying reality that his country club connections and his friendship with the local county judge were completely useless against federal law enforcement violently crashed down on him. Federal penitentiary? Arthur stammered, his voice a thin, high-pitched croak of absolute panic. He instinctively took a slow step backward into the damp dirt. Officer, listen to me. There is a massive misunderstanding here. I am a senior partner at my firm. I didn't commit environmental terrorism. Harper is my daughter. We are family. This is a simple property dispute over a $500,000 house. I simply signed a municipal permit so my son could build a family home on this useless land. A municipal permit obtained through felony forgery is null and void, sir, the lead agent replied smoothly, his tone entirely devoid of any sympathy. He didn't care about Arthur's firm or his golf polo, and a $500,000 structure sitting directly on a Class 1 federal conservation easement is legally classified as an integrated ecological barrier. Well, by crushing that structure and dragging toxic drywall debris and treated cedar directly into protected migratory waters, you have executed an unauthorized catastrophic industrial spill. We don't negotiate property disputes. We enforce the Clean Water Act. Derek, the 28-year-old arrogant golden child, completely panicked. The illusion of his free, luxurious infinity pool and private boat dock vaporized in a microsecond, replaced by the crushing reality of federal prison. And he didn't stand by his father. He didn't try to defend the family. He instantly activated his deeply ingrained survival instinct. Absolute cowardly betrayal. I didn't do it. I didn't sign anything, Derek shrieked, his voice cracking violently as he dropped his expensive Yeti thermos into the mud, holding both of his hands high in the air in pathetic surrender. He wildly pointed a trembling finger directly at his own parents. It was his idea. Dad forged her signature on the demolition permit. Mom paid the bulldozer company in cash. I just wanted a house. I didn't tell them to destroy a federal wetland. They did it. Arrest them. Derek, how could you? Margaret gasped sharply, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer, horrified disbelief. The suburban matriarch had just been violently thrown under the bus by the very son she had committed a felony to spoil. Shut up, Mom. I'm not going to a federal prison for a stupid patch of weeds. Derek wailed hysterically, taking 3 rapid, frantic steps backward, physically distancing himself from the catastrophic legal liability of his own parents. He's lying. He begged us for this property. He said her house was outdated and he needed it to project success, Margaret shrieked, completely abandoning her dignified posture. She aggressively pointed her gold-plated smartphone at Derek. The family shares its wealth, but we did this for you, Derek. You ungrateful brat. Well, we destroyed her house for you. And you successfully documented the entire conspiracy on high-definition video, Margaret. I noted cleanly, my voice cutting through the screaming. I pointed directly at the gold-plated smartphone gripped tightly in my mother's trembling hand. The lead agent's sharp eyes instantly locked onto the device. Margaret froze. The color violently drained from her face, leaving her looking physically ill beneath her expensive designer coat. The smug, sociopathic smile she had worn while recording my devastating breakdown was completely obliterated. She looked down at the bright screen of her smartphone. The red recording dot was still actively pulsing. She had literally just filmed her husband confessing to real estate fraud and herself confessing to funding an environmental crime on a highly restricted Federal Reserve. Pure, irrational panic took over her brain. She assumed the federal legal system operated like a deleted social media post. She assumed that if she just got rid of the video, the federal agents would simply have to walk away and apologize for the misunderstanding. Margaret's thumb scrambled frantically across the glass screen, desperately trying to swipe up, close the camera app, and hit the delete button. "No, I didn't. I didn't record anything," Margaret wailed loudly, her fingers fumbling over the glass. "It's a family dispute. The video is gone. There's no proof. You can't arrest us without proof. Harper is just being a selfish, vindictive liar." The lead agent didn't shout a warning. He didn't ask her politely to hand over the phone. Federal law enforcement does not tolerate the active destruction of digital evidence during a high-risk felony investigation. "Drop the device!" the lead agent roared, his deep voice completely overpowering the entire lakefront. Before Margaret could even process the command, a second, the heavily built EPACID agent closed the distance in 2 rapid, aggressive strides. His heavy tactical boots crunched loudly in the mud. He didn't hesitate. He forcefully grabbed Margaret's right wrist, violently wrenching her arm downward and twisting it firmly behind her back. "No, Arthur, do something. He's hurting me." Margaret screamed in absolute terror, the gold-plated smartphone slipping from her fingers and landing softly in the damp grass, the screen still glowing brightly. The heavy or metallic clatter of steel handcuffs unspooling from a tactical belt echoed sharply across the ruined property. The agent forcefully grabbed her left wrist, crossing them tightly together at the small of her back over her expensive designer coat, and secured them with freezing steel. The ratcheting click of the metal teeth engaging was deafening. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit felony environmental destruction, real estate fraud, and the active attempted destruction of federal evidence," the agent announced cleanly, perfectly executing the exact punishment the law demanded. "Margaret!" Arthur shouted, his booming patriarchal voice shattering completely into a frantic, high-pitched sob. He instinctively took a step toward his wife, raising his hands. "Officers, please, she is 60 years old. We are a wealthy family. We will write a massive check right now to fix the weeds. Just tell us how much the federal government wants. We will pay it." "Sir, place your hands behind your back," the lead agent commanded sharply, his hand dropping heavily to his utility belt. "You cannot bribe your way out of a Clean Water Act violation." "No, wait, I have connections. I know the county judge." Arthur stammered wildly, his eyes wide with unfiltered panic as the lead agent forcefully turned him around. He desperately looked over his shoulder at me. The arrogant, or booming father who had threatened to cut me off from the family 20 minutes ago was completely, irrevocably broken. "Harper, please," Arthur whispered, his voice trembling violently as the heavy steel cuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, binding his hands securely behind his back. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them I had your permission to sign the demolition permit. Tell them you wanted the A-frame torn down. If I get charged with federal fraud, I will lose my senior partnership. I will be disbarred. We will lose our entire estate to the fines. Please, we are your family." I didn't drop to my knees in tears. I didn't scream at him. I simply stood powerfully in my olive-green canvas jacket, staring at the 30-ton excavator sitting in the ruins of my $500,000 sanctuary. "I cannot tell the federal agents I gave you permission to destroy a protected wetland, Arthur," I stated cleanly, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "because if I suddenly claim I authorized the mechanical dredging of a Class 1 biological reserve, the EPA will immediately indict me as a co-conspirator in an environmental felony." I slowly zipped up my canvas jacket, shielding myself from the cold breeze coming off the lake. And I am not risking my spotless professional record, my career as a senior biologist, and 10 years in a federal penitentiary to cover up a felony fraud you orchestrated just so Derek could have a free infinity pool, I concluded quietly. I looked directly into my father's terrified, tear-streaked eyes. You don't need to cut me off from the family, I noted, perfectly executing the lethal callback to their earlier threat, Diretries 3. Because the federal government is about to cut the family off from its wealth. The heavy or metallic clatter of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around Arthur's wrists cut sharply through his frantic, high-pitched sobbing. The arrogant, booming patriarch who had ordered the violent destruction of my $500,000 sanctuary was completely, irrevocably broken in the mud. Derek, the 28-year-old arrogant golden child, visibly relaxed. He wiped a bead of nervous sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, entirely convinced that his instantaneous, a cowardly betrayal of his own parents had successfully shielded him from the catastrophic federal blast radius. He took a slow, deliberate step backward toward the pristine luxury SUV parked at the top of my ruined driveway. "Well, thank God that's sorted out," Derek muttered, flashing a weak, completely unbothered smirk toward the lead agent. He casually pointed at his weeping parents. "I told you guys it was a bad idea to forge her signature. You really brought this on yourselves. Officer, if you don't need my statement right now, I'm just going to head back to my apartment." Derek turned his back, fully intending to casually stroll away from the shattered ruins of a protected migratory habitat and leave his parents to face a decade in federal prison alone. "Mr. Vance, stop walking," the lead agent commanded, his deep voice carrying an effortless, terrifying authority. Derek froze mid-step, his designer sunglasses slipping slightly down his nose. He slowly turned around, his arrogant frat boy smile instantly vaporizing. "Excuse me?" Derek stammered, raising his hands in pathetic surrender. "I didn't forge the demolition permit. I didn't pay the bulldozer operator. My dad just confessed to it on camera. I'm completely innocent." "You didn't physically forge the signature, no," the lead agent agreed smoothly, entirely devoid of any sympathy. He casually held up Margaret's gold-plated smartphone, which he had confiscated from the damp grass, and the screen was still glowing brightly. The lead agent didn't need a magical GPS tracker. He simply tapped the screen and scrubbed the video timeline backward exactly 5 minutes. The crisp, clear audio of Derek's own arrogant voice blasted loudly from the phone speaker directly into the freezing morning air. The A-frame was incredibly outdated. "I'm having the crew clear the entire lot today. It's going to have a sick infinity pool." Derek's face completely drained of color. Then his jaw dropped in sheer, unfiltered horror. "You didn't just passively observe the destruction of a $500,000 asset," the lead agent noted cleanly, executing the lethal technical blow. "You actively claimed ownership of a fraudulently obtained property and explicitly ordered the mechanical dredging of a Class 1 protected wetland to construct an unauthorized swimming pool. You are the primary financial beneficiary of the conspiracy." "No, that was a joke," Derek wailed hysterically, violently dropping his expensive Yeti thermos into the mud. He desperately pointed a trembling finger at the ruined A-frame house. "I didn't know it was a Federal Reserve. I thought she was just being a selfish, vindictive liar. The family shares its wealth. I don't even like the lake. You can't arrest me for a joke." The Environmental Protection Agency does not have a sense of humor regarding the unauthorized destruction of a migratory habitat, the lead agent stated cleanly. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He simply gestured sharply to a third heavily built federal agent. "No, Mom, do something, Dad!" Derek shrieked in absolute terror, wildly twisting his torso as the massive federal agent forcefully grabbed his right arm, violently wrenching it firmly behind his back over his expensive pastel polo shirt. Margaret and Arthur stood completely frozen in their own heavy steel handcuffs, openly sobbing in the mud, entirely powerless to stop the federal justice system from swallowing their precious golden child whole. The heavy metallic clatter of a third pair of steel handcuffs unspooling into the air was deafening. The agent forcefully grabbed Derek's left wrist, crossing them tightly together at the small of his back, and secured them with freezing steel. The ratcheting click of the metal teeth engaging finalized his total social destruction. Or you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit environmental terrorism, accessory to real estate fraud, and the active solicitation of habitat destruction, the agent announced, explicitly executing the exact punishment the law demanded. 4 hours later, the quiet, pristine waters of Blackwood Lake were entirely surrounded by bright yellow federal crime scene do not enter barricade tape. I was sitting perfectly still on the tailgate of my truck, Joe parked safely near the top of my ruined gravel driveway. My heavy olive green waxed canvas jacket shielded me from the cold breeze. I was holding a hot cup of coffee a federal marshal had kindly handed me. I didn't cry for my destroyed home anymore. I was already mentally drafting the massive civil lawsuit I was going to drop on my parents' 10-acre estate. My cell phone, resting face up on the metal tailgate, abruptly began vibrating violently. The harsh, uninvasive buzzing shattered the quiet of my temporary sanctuary. The caller ID flashed brightly, Federal Detention Center, inmate call. Arthur had clearly utilized his one guaranteed phone call from the holding cell at the federal intake facility before his phone was permanently confiscated for digital forensic extraction. I hit the green accept button, put the phone on speaker, and laid it flat next to my coffee cup. Harper! Arthur's booming patriarch voice echoed violently off the metal of my truck. It wasn't confident. It was thin, frantic, and vibrating with an unfiltered panic. The background noise on his end was the chaotic, echoing chatter of a heavily secured federal processing lobby. "Are you insane?" Arthur bellowed into the microphone. "I am standing at the federal precinct. They just forcefully marched your mother and your brother into separate holding cells." Derek was stripped of his designer clothes and put in a paper jail uniform. My senior partners at the law firm just saw my arrest on the local news. Do you have any idea what you have just done to this family? "I didn't do anything to this family, Arthur," I replied smoothly, my voice entirely devoid of emotion. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I simply reported a massive or active environmental crime to the proper authorities to secure a biological sanctuary before it was permanently contaminated by toxic drywall dust. "It wasn't a crime. It's a piece of dirt," Arthur shrieked, his patience completely snapping. He violently slapped his hand against a hard surface, the heavy thud carrying through the phone. "We didn't rob a bank. You travel all the time. You weren't even using the land right. The family shares its wealth. Derek needed a premium property to project success, and you hoarded it like a selfish brat. You completely ruined his entire life over a stupid family misunderstanding. If the family is supposed to share its wealth," I stated cleanly, executing the final trap with mechanical precision, "then why didn't you simply share the 10 acres of your massive luxury estate in the gated community to build him a legitimate lakefront property?" There was a sharp, terrified silence on the line. The heavy, rhythmic breathing of my father trying to process the absolute hypocrisy of his own financial priorities echoed through the speaker. I had to protect our landscaping, Harper," Arthur stammered, his voice vibrating with obvious defensive irritation. "Our estate is perfectly manicured. We couldn't afford to have a loud construction zone ruining our golf course view. Derek needed a quiet place to throw boat parties. Now we needed to project success to his friends." And now he looks incredibly cheap, sitting in a federal holding cell in an orange jumpsuit, I noted quietly, entirely unbothered by his panic. Because his friends, who he was trying so desperately to impress, just watched his parents get arrested for real estate fraud on the morning news. "You have to stop this immediately," Arthur screamed, entirely abandoning reason. And he assumed the federal legal system operated like a local county courthouse he could easily bully. "Call your contacts at the EPA right now. Tell the lead agent that this is a massive mistake. Tell them you gave me permission to forge the demolition permit. If we get charged with a federal felony, I will be disbarred, and your mother will be kicked out of the country club. You are ruining our lives over a stupid patch of weeds." "I cannot call the EPA and tell them it was a mistake." To Arthur, I explained, leaning back against my truck. "Because it wasn't a mistake. And even if I wanted to perjure myself to protect a man who just destroyed my life's work, the situation is completely out of my hands. The moment the federal agents flagged the property as a Class 1 wetland violation, the incident escalated beyond a simple civil complaint into a priority federal jurisdiction." "What do you mean it's out of your hands?" Arthur whispered, his voice trembling violently. You are the owner. Just drop the charges. I will pay you back for the broken house." "I am the registered owner, yes," I confirmed calmly. "But my commercial underwriter holds the primary insurance policy on that $500,000 asset. When a federal destruction report is officially filed and a 30-ton machine violently breaches a conservation easement, the insurance company automatically locks the legal file to prevent insurance fraud." I picked up a pen from my pocket and tapped it once against the metal tailgate. If I suddenly call the EPA and claim I accidentally reported my own sanctuary destroyed while my brother was building a pool on it, the Insurance Fraud Division will immediately launch a criminal investigation into me for filing a false federal report. I continued, my tone flat and mechanical. "I am not risking my spotless professional record, my career as a senior biologist, and 10 years in a federal penitentiary to cover up a felony fraud you orchestrated. Harper, please," Arthur wailed in the background, entirely abandoning his booming patriarch persona. "I will write a massive check right now. I will demand they release us immediately." "You cannot buy your way out of a Clean Water Act violation, Arthur," I stated cleanly. "And before you demand anything, you might want to call your bank." "What are you talking about?" Arthur snapped angrily. "Because the primary destruction occurred on a highly restricted federal reserve," I explained, my voice turning to pure ice. "I didn't just provide the EPA with Margaret's recorded confession video. I also provided it to my corporate insurance adjuster and my civil attorney." The line went completely dead silent. Or the insurance company is rapidly deploying a forensic structural engineer to formally assess the total loss of my $500,000 home, and the EPA is actively calculating the daily statutory fines for the mechanical dredging of the protected shoreline, I concluded. "And because you are currently being processed on felony fraud charges specifically related to the destruction of my property, the insurance company will legally subrogate the entire damage claim directly against your personal 10-acre luxury estate." "You can't do that," Arthur shrieked, his voice vibrating with hysterical desperation. "We don't have $500,000 in liquid cash to pay for a stupid wooden cabin." "It's not just the cabin, Arthur," I corrected him softly. "The EPA is legally required to deploy a highly specialized or hazmat-certified aquatic remediation team to manually extract every single splinter of treated wood and every ounce of toxic drywall dust from the protected waterline. The federal government is going to subrogate that multi-million-dollar cleanup cost against your estate as well." Arthur let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. "When this is over, we are completely cutting you off from this family. Do you hear me? You are dead to us, Harper. Dead," Arthur roared. or desperately trying to reclaim control through sheer volume. Margaret already promised me that 4 hours ago, I said quietly, flawlessly executing the lethal callback. I disconnected the call, placed the phone face down on the tailgate, and watched the federal agents continue to process the crime scene. The line went completely, abruptly dead. My cell phone rested face down on the cold, scratched metal tailgate of my truck. The distant, or chaotic noise of the highly secured federal detention center lobby, where my father was desperately trying to buy his way out of an environmental felony, was entirely severed from the freezing morning air of Blackwood Lake. I didn't cry for my lost sanctuary anymore. I didn't feel a single trace of guilt or regret for orchestrating their total social, financial, and legal destruction. When you deliberately forge your own daughter's signature to illegally authorize a 30-ton excavator to violently crush her $500,000 home and stand in the mud, laughing and recording her tears, just so your chronically unemployed golden child can build a vanity infinity pool, you don't get to hide behind the family shares its wealth defense when the federal penal code finally catches up to you. I leaned back against my truck, watching the heavily armed EPA CID agents string bright yellow federal crime scene tape across my splintered cedar porch. My property was temporarily destroyed, but my legal liability was entirely zeroed out, and my ultimate revenge was just beginning. I simply reached for my keys, took a deep breath of the cold lake air, and started mentally drafting the blueprints for my new upgraded eco-sanctuary. Over the next 18 months, the federal justice system and the EPA executed an absolute masterclass in bureaucratic destruction against my family, answering every single threat they had ever made against me with strict, uncompromising judicial mathematics. Because Margaret had actively recorded the entire crime on her gold-plated smartphone, their high-priced corporate defense attorneys had absolutely zero leverage. And the federal prosecutor simply played the high-definition video of Arthur loudly confessing to forging a municipal permit, Derek explicitly ordering the destruction of the wetland, and Margaret actively funding the bulldozer. The icing on the cake was the federal agent's body camera footage, showing Margaret desperately trying to delete the video file during an active raid. Arthur, the booming patriarch who genuinely believed his local connections made him a god, suffered a devastating professional and legal collapse. He was indicted for felony forgery, real estate fraud, and severe violations of the Clean Water Act. The State Bar Association permanently disbarred him, stripping him of his senior partnership instantly. The federal judge sentenced him to 60 months, 5 years, in a federal penitentiary. Margaret's arrogant, untouchable suburban matriarch persona was completely obliterated in federal court, where she was convicted of conspiracy to commit environmental destruction and the federal tampering of evidence. The judge, entirely unamused by her family wealth excuse, sentenced her to 48 months in a minimum security federal facility, instantly triggering her permanent, humiliating expulsion from her exclusive country club. Derek, the 28-year-old arrogant golden child who tried to throw his parents under the bus to save his own skin, did not escape the blast radius. When he was convicted of solicitation of habitat destruction and accessory to fraud, he was sentenced to 36 months in federal prison. As a condition of his supervised release, the man who demanded a pristine infinity pool was legally forced to wear a high-visibility orange vest and spend 1,000 hours manually picking up toxic trash in public swamps. Their financial ruin was the final devastating blow. The federal government does not negotiate environmental fines. Because the 30-ton bulldozer had unlawfully breached a Class 1 protected wetland and caused a massive toxic drywall spill, the federal judge levied the maximum statutory penalties. Arthur and Margaret were fined exactly $5 million in direct federal environmental fines. On top of the fines, the insurance company successfully subrogated the $500,000 required to rebuild my custom cedar A-frame house, and the EPA legally billed them an additional $1,200,000 for the highly specialized hazmat-certified aquatic remediation team deployed to extract the toxic debris from the protected water line, to pay the crushing $6,700,000 in total federal restitution and fines. The United States government officially seized and auctioned off their pristine 10-acre luxury golf course estate. They lost every single cent of their retirement, their luxury SUVs, and their status. They are entirely and permanently bankrupt. My $500,000 property was flawlessly cleared of debris by the federal hazmat team 3 months later. I used the massive insurance payout to build a stunning 2-story eco-mansion with reinforced steel gates and a state-of-the-art security system. They thought they could use a forged county document and a toxic family communism excuse to bulldoze my life's work just so an entitled 28-year-old could show off his boat to his frat brothers. They thought I would simply panic or surrender the land and absorb the massive financial loss to avoid embarrassing them. They completely forgot that a senior wetland biologist doesn't argue with entitled thieves. I just let them record their own felony confessions on a smartphone called the federal agents and let the EPA hand them a multi-million-dollar bill. If your entitled family forged your signature, hired a 30-ton bulldozer to violently crush your $500,000 custom lake house so your unemployed brother could build a luxury pool and laughed in your face while recording you cry, would you have called the armed federal EPA agents to raid them? Or would you have just surrendered your land to keep the family peace? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of absolute federally enforced justice, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Now, see you in the next video.